In this video, you're going to learn how to get input from the user, which is exactly what we need to create the Notes application. If a user wants to add a note, we need to know the note's title as well as the body of the note. If they want to fetch a note, we need to know the title of the note they want to fetch. And all this information needs to come into our app. And Note apps, they don't really do anything cool until they do get this dynamic user input. This is what makes your scripts useful and awesome. Now, throughout the course, we're going to be creating Node apps that get input from the user in a lot of different ways. We're going to be using Socket.io to get real-time info from a web app. We'll be creating our own API so other websites and servers can make AJAX requests to our app. But in this video, we're going to start things off with a very basic example of how to get user input. We're going to be getting input from the user inside of the command line. That means when you run the app in the command line, you'll be able to pass in some arguments. Those arguments will be available inside of Node, and then we can do something with them like create a note, delete a note, or return notes. To kick things off, let's go ahead and run our app from the terminal. We're going to run it pretty similarly to how we ran it in the past. We're going to start with Node. I'm not using NodeMon since we're going to be changing the input. Then we're going to use app.js, which is the file we want to run. But then we can still type other variables. We can pass all sorts of command line arguments in. We could have a command, and this would tell the app what to do, whether you want to add a note, remove a note, or list a note. That might look something like this. This would add a note, we could remove a note like this, and we could list all of our notes using the list command. Now, when we run this command, the app is still going to work as expected. Just because we passed in a new argument doesn't mean our app is going to crash. And we actually have access to this argument already, we're just not using it inside of the application. To access the command line arguments your app was initialized with, you're going to want to use that process object that we explored in the very first section of this course. We can go ahead and log out all of the arguments using console.log to print them to the screen. It's on the process object, and the property we're looking for is argv. Argv is short for arguments vector, or in the case of JavaScript, it's more like an arguments array. This is going to be an array of all of the command line arguments passed in, and we can use them to start creating our application. Take a moment to save app.js, and then we're going to go ahead and rerun this file. And right here, we have 3 items. The first 2 are not particularly useful. One points to the executable for Node that was used. The second one points to the app file that was started. In this case, it was app.js. The third one, though, this is where our command line arguments start to come into play. Right here, we have our list showing up as a string, and this is fantastic. That means we can access that third item in the array, and that is going to be the command for our note application. Let's go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to make a variable called command and set it equal to process.argv, and we're going to grab that item in the third position, which is the index of 2. Then we can go ahead and log that out to the screen. By logging out command, the string, then I'm going to go ahead and as the second argument, pass in the actual command that was used. And this is just a simple log to keep track of how the app is getting executed. The cool stuff is going to come when we add if statements that do different things depending on that command. Let's go ahead and create an if-else block down below. If the command equals add. If that's the case, we're going to go through the process of adding a new note. Now, as you notice, we're not specifying the other arguments that are going to be necessary for that, like the title or the body. We'll get to that in just a few videos. For now, though, if the command does equal add, we're going to go ahead and use console.log to print adding new note. Awesome. And we can go ahead and do the exact same thing with a command like list. Else if command equals the string list. If the command does equal the string list, we're going to go ahead and run this block of code using console.log to print listing all notes. We can also add an else clause if there is no command. Else console.log command not recognized. Perfect. With this in place, we can now rerun our app for a third time, and this time around, you see we have the command equal to list, and listing all notes shows up. This means we were able to use our argument to run different code. Notice that we didn't run adding new note, and we didn't run command not recognized. We could, however, switch this from list to add, and in that case, we're going to get adding new note printing down below, and if we run a command that doesn't exist, like read, you can see command not recognized prints. So far, everything is working great. We're able to get that input from the user. What I'd like you to do is add 2 more else if clauses to our if block. One is going to be for the read command, which will be responsible for getting an individual note back. And another one called remove is going to be responsible for removing the note. All you have to do is add the else if statement for both of them, and then just put a quick console.log printing something like fetching note or removing note. Take a moment to knock that out as your challenge for this video. Once you add those 2 else if clauses, go ahead and run both of them from the terminal and make sure your log shows up. If it does show up, you are done. You can go ahead and click play. Take a moment to pause the video, knock that out, and when you're done, click play. How'd it go? Hopefully you were able to add those 2 else if clauses and test things out from the terminal. The first thing I'm going to do is add a else if for read. I'm going to open and close my curly braces and hit enter right in the middle so everything gets formatted correctly. Here, I'm going to check if the command variable equals the string read. In the future, we're going to be calling methods that update our local database with the notes, but for now, we're going to use console.log to print reading note. Perfect. The next thing that you needed to do was add an else if clause that checks if the command equals remove. Else if, I'm going to open and close my condition and hit enter just like I did before. This time, if the command equals remove, we want to do something. And in that case, all we're going to do is use console.log to print removing note. Excellent. And with this in place, we are done. We've added 2 new commands we can run over inside of the terminal, and we can test those. First up, I'm going to run node app.js with the read command, and here a reading note shows up. Then I'm going to rerun the command. This time, I'm going to be using remove. And when I do that, removing note prints to the screen. I'm going to wrap up my testing by using a command that doesn't exist. And when I run that, you can see command not recognized shows up, which is fantastic. Now this is step 1. We now have support for various commands. The next thing we need to figure out is how we're going to get more specific information. For example, which note do you want to remove? Which note do you want to read? And what do you want the note text to be in the case of add? This is all information we need to get from the terminal. Now getting it is going to be pretty similar to what we did before. And to show you what it looks like, we're going to be printing out the entire argv object once again using console.log process.argv. Over in the terminal, we can now run a more complex command. Let's say we want to remove a note using node app.js remove. And we're going to do that by its title. We might use the title argument, which looks like this. Here we have 2 hyphens, followed by the argument name, which is title, followed by the equals sign. Then we can type our note title. Maybe the note title is secrets. This is going to pass the title argument into our application. Now there is a couple different ways you could format this. We could have title secrets like this. We could have title equals secrets inside of quotes, which is going to let us use spaces in the title. Or we could remove the equal sign altogether and simply put a space. No matter how you choose to format your argument, these are all valid ways to pass in the title. This is Andrew with a quick update. As you see here, I am using double quotes when wrapping my string. Now, if you switch to single quotes, it's not going to break on Linux or OS X, but it is going to break on Windows. That means when you're passing in command line arguments like the title or the note body, you're going to want to wrap your strings when you have spaces in double quotes, not single. So if you are using Windows and you're getting some sort of unexpected behavior with your arguments, make sure you're using double quotes instead of single. That should fix the issue. For the moment, I'm going to keep the equal sign and the quotes and rerun the command. When I run the command this time, you can see we have our 2 arguments. These are the arguments that we don't need. We have our command, which is the 3rd one, and we now have a new 4th string, the title that is equal to secrets2. And this is great. Our argument was successfully passed into the application. The problem is that it's not very easy to use. Here we have to parse out the key, which is title, and the value, which is secrets2. When we use the command, which was the 3rd argument, it was a lot easier to use inside of our app. We simply pulled it out of the arguments array, and we referenced it by using the command variable and checking if it equaled add, list, read, or remove. Things get a lot more complex as we use different styles for passing in the arguments. If we rerun the last command with a space, instead of an equal sign, which is perfectly valid, our arguments array now looks completely different. Here we have the title as the 4th item, and we have the value, which is secrets2, as the 5th, which means we have to add other conditions for parsing. And this turns into a pain really quick, which is why we are not going to do it. We're going to use a third-party module called yargs in the next video to make parsing the command line arguments effortless. Instead of having strings like this one, or the one up above, we're going to get an object where the title property equals the secrets2 string. That's going to make it super easy to implement the rest of the Notes application. Before we go, let's take a quick moment to recap what we learned. First up, we learned that we can use command line arguments to pass data into our app. Inside of the app, we can use process.argv to grab that information and do something with it. In the case of our command, we run different code depending on the command the user wanted to use. This is all done because process.argv is automatically populated with all the command line arguments. You don't have to do anything special to get them. Now, parsing certain types of command line arguments, like key value pairs, becomes a lot more complex, which is why in the next video, we're going to be using yargs to do just that. So stay tuned. I will see you soon.